So before we get started with our first part today, point of order, meeting and facilitation basics, I'm going to send out a series of files to everyone. You're going to receive 5 files, and one is on Robert's Rules of Order, then a sample regional meeting agenda, a soft skills tip sheet, 10 tips when facilitating discussions, and an agenda template, and I'm sending them right now. So I'm going to hand everything off to Denika with a quick reminder for everyone to please mute your phones. Denika Boardman.
Thanks so much, Ted, and thanks everyone for your time today. I'd like to spend a few moments talking about agenda creation, but before I do that, let me describe the picture that is on my current slide. It is 3 men and 1 woman seated around a conference table for a meeting, and that was simply a desperate attempt to include some color in my slides. The complete absence of any good clip art out there is the subject of a whole other webinar, but I did at least make an attempt there. So basically, when you decide to create an agenda, the first thing that you need to consider is the purpose and goals of your meeting. So in other words, what outcomes do you want to achieve, and who needs to be present in that meeting in order to achieve those goals? Everything on the agenda, the topics, the times, the presenters, should be arranged in order to meet the goals for the meeting. I always include the basic information about the meeting, such as the time, date, location, and conference call number on any agenda I create, because people will have a tendency to ignore an email and just open an attachment, and no matter how many times you use the same conference call number, someone will need it again. So those are always important things to include. Next, when you're thinking about creating an agenda, you will need to establish a process for collecting agenda items. Every agenda should be created with input from your group members. You will need to establish a structure to ensure that your members are included. We send out a draft agenda 1 week ahead of regional meetings in the Systems Change Network, and we ask specifically for agenda items. There are a variety of approaches to doing this, but it's basically really important to remember that the leader of a group should never create the agenda in isolation, because you risk alienating your members, and people don't want to participate in a meeting that they don't feel a part of. So it's really important that you include them in the creation of the agenda itself. And finally, when you are reviewing the final draft of an agenda before it is disseminated, you must remember that you always should have someone else review the agenda before you send it out. And I know this seems like it goes without saying, but there is nothing worse than having to respond to dozens of emails because you wrote down the time wrong, or having to apologize to one of your presenters because you misspelled their name. So always, always, always have someone else look at your agenda before you send it out to your group members. And in more formal settings like local government meetings, if you use the wrong word on an agenda, it may mean that you can't take action on a particular item. So it is even more important to ensure that it is reviewed. I think we've all probably been in situations in local government meetings where the agenda will say accept rather than approved, and we know that we cannot take action because the agenda has the wrong language. So it's very important to make sure it's reviewed before you send it out. I'm going to go ahead and move to my next slide. Okay. Sorry, but I'm just trying to get my slide to move. There we go. Yay. Okay, and next we're going to talk just briefly about roles within a meeting. And in a successful meeting that you have will have participants that are willing to take responsibility for filling a particular role. First, before I go on, let me describe the picture that is on my slide. It's a group of stick figures in a circle in different primary colors. Once again, just an attempt to get some Good clip art going there. The first role that I'll review is the facilitator, which is sometimes referred to as the president or chair of a meeting. The facilitator keeps the discussion going and the process moving along. In most meetings, the facilitator will take responsibility for the process. In other words, starting and ending on time, enforcing ground rules, etc., but does not take part in the discussion. In the Systems Change Network, we do this a bit differently. We want advocates to have the opportunity to build their facilitation skills, so we rotate this responsibility among the advocates in our region. But in many different types of meetings, you will not see the facilitator taking an active role as a meeting participant. My recommendation would be to have a separate facilitator for meetings that is not participating, because you tend to make facilitation mistakes when you're concentrating on what you want to say during a meeting rather than the actual facilitation. The next role that we'll talk about is the minute taker or secretary. The minute taker is obviously the person who takes notes during a meeting. Having a minute taker for meetings is absolutely crucial for understanding what took place during a meeting, and more importantly, what action needs to be taken after the meeting. I tend to be rather strict on this. My personal philosophy is that if there were no notes from a meeting, then it didn't happen. I really tell anyone who is taking minutes from me not to do any other things during the meeting, just take the minutes. In local government meetings, the secretary is responsible for keeping copies of the minutes and maintaining them as the official record of the committee. I think we've all been in situations where we sat in a meeting, the minutes that came out were not all that great of quality, and then we had trouble following up and taking action because no one really had a good record of what happened in the meeting. So that just underscores once again the importance of good minute taking. The next role is the process connector. And this role is used when there is both in-person and phone participation during a meeting, which is a so-called hybrid meeting. Since we have both in-person and phone participation in regional meetings, you can think of them as hybrid meetings. It's a relatively new term for me. I thought it was kind of high-tech, so I thought, hey, it sounds great. Sounds like we're getting ahead of ourselves. Let's talk about hybrid meetings. But the process connector is there to ensure that phone participants are being heard, and the process connector will interrupt the meeting if necessary to make sure that any feedback from phone participants is being incorporated into the meeting. This is something that we recently started using in the Systems Change Network. I think that it works well because we have had challenges with people participating by phone, feeling as if they weren't really as much of a part of the meeting and feeling, bad about that. So we have a representative for them that's there in person in the role of the process connector. And then next we have members. It is the role of the group leader to make sure that everyone participates in a meeting. If you notice that someone is not participating, you can ask the group a question and ask each person in the group what they think using a round-robin technique. You can even break into small groups to discuss a topic because some members might be more comfortable that way. I tend to take sort of a community organizer perspective on this, and if someone is acting like they don't have a job in a meeting, I give them one. So it's important to think of your members as always having something to do. Next, we'll move on to the timekeeper. Obviously, the timekeeper will let the group know when time is up for a particular item. This is once again a very important role because people don't feel respected when you don't start on time and don't end on time. So if I'm acting as timekeeper, I will usually say something like, we're at time for this item. Please briefly summarize. You certainly don't want to come off as sort of the meeting yard duty when you're acting as a timekeeper. You do want to keep your voice soft and just very direct, but certainly don't cut anyone off in a way that's going to make them feel negative about what's going on in the meeting. And the last rule in a meeting is your guest presenters. Make sure that you take the time to review any agenda that you put together with your guest presenters. They may have questions prior to your meeting. And the last thing that you want is for someone to arrive at your meeting without a clear understanding of what you would like for them to cover. I've been in local government meetings where a guest will stand up and say, thank you so much for inviting me, so-and-so. What would you like me to cover? And no one wants to sit in a meeting with a guest speaker that they feel is not prepared. That's a good way to make them feel as if they're wasting their time. In the Systems Change Network, we will send an agenda out multiple times, almost to the point of being annoying. I do admit that, just so everyone will know their role within a meeting. So on to my next slide. Okay. Finally, on timelines. There are a couple of important points to remember when you're thinking about timelines for your meeting announcements and your minutes. Once again, let me describe the picture that is on my slide. It is a picture of a woman with a ponytail looking up at a giant grandfather clock. I thought it was fitting because we're going to talk about timelines, and I know we all have times when we feel like clocks rule our lives, so I thought the big clock was particularly apropos for this discussion. In terms of announcements and meetings, as I previously mentioned, I do have a tendency to send out meeting notices until it gets a bit annoying. I'm not suggesting that you go that far, but it is important to send out meeting notices at least 1 week prior, if not more, to your meeting, because travel has got to be planned. You've got to collect RSVPs so you know who's attending, so you can prepare for food and other items that you'll need for your meeting. And in some cases, like in the Systems Change Network, attendance at a particular meeting must be authorized by supervisors. So it's particularly important that everyone know ahead of time when a meeting is going to happen. And as we all know in the disability community, we do have accommodations that must be planned for and in place for our group members to attend. So we all know the bad joke, vote early and vote often. The same goes for your meeting announcements. Send them early and send them often. And now regarding reviewing your minutes, I think it's important that you never assume that because you're in the same meeting with your minute taker, that that person is capturing the key points that you're capturing. I've made this mistake many times. And I know that oftentimes you think that your minute taker is taking great notes and the person is doodling in the margin, or they're not understanding what to write down, whatever the case may be. Until you review those notes, they could be drawing cartoons in the margin for all you know. So take the time to review the minutes and, if necessary, include important information that was missed before they're sent out. Our process in the Systems Change Network is to send minutes to our statewide organizer for review. In other settings like a nonprofit board or a local government meeting, the standard process is that the minutes are considered draft until they are approved by the committee. So members have the opportunity to review the draft for any additions or corrections at the next meeting, and then a formal motion is made to approve those minutes. And it's usually the first order of business at the next meeting to go ahead and approve those minutes, but they're not circulated to the public until they are approved. So that is my time, and I'd like to go ahead and turn things over to Ted to talk with you about facilitation.
Thank you very much, Denika. So we're going to talk a little bit now about facilitating a meeting once you're at the meeting. And really the point of facilitation comes down to three things, and that is the flow of the meeting, to keep the meeting moving, being a taskmaster, staying on topic with the agenda and making sure that everything that you have decided that you wanted to discuss within the set period of time in the meeting that's on the agenda is discussed, and engagement, an opportunity for each member to speak and an opportunity for every person in that meeting to be a stakeholder in the meeting. So now we're going to look at some tips for facilitating a meeting. During an active meeting, you want lots of group discussion. Your role is to facilitate the flow of comments from participants. Although it is not necessary to interject your comments after each participant speaks, periodically assisting the group with their contributions can be helpful. Here is a 10-point facilitation menu to use as you lead group discussions. Paraphrase what a participant has said so that he or she feels understood and so that the other participants can hear a concise summary of what's been said. Check your understanding of a participant's statement or ask the participant to clarify what he or she is saying. That's when we check for the meaning. Give positive feedback. Compliment an interesting or insightful comment. You want to expand and elaborate. Elaborate on a participant's contribution to the discussion with examples or suggestions or suggest a new way to view the problem. Increase the pace. Energize a discussion by quickening the pace, using humor or, if necessary, prodding the group for more contributions. This is a great opportunity to ask probing questions. And then, of course, sometimes we do want to play devil's advocate, but very gently. And by doing that, you want to disagree very gently with the participants' comments to stimulate further discussion by saying something like, I can see where you're coming from, but I'm not sure what you are describing is always the case. Has anyone else had an experience different from Jim's? Relieve the tension. Mediate differences of opinion between participants and relieve any tensions that may be brewing. And consolidate. Pull together ideas showing their relationship to each other. You can also change the process to keep the meeting going. After the method for obtaining participation or by having the group evaluate ideas that have been presented. And most importantly, at the end, summarize. Summarize and record, if desired, the major views of the group. You can also use a whiteboard or a large newsprint pad on an easel during a meeting to take down major notes or major things that were talked about. You can kind of review those and summarize the meeting. On this slide, we do have an image, and it's a picture of the systems change advocates at a statewide meeting. They're seated around a table, and they all have notebooks and binders in front of them, and they're involved in a discussion. So now that we're in a meeting and we're using all of those skills, one of the things that's important to keep the meeting flowing is our interpersonal, or what we call soft skills. Soft skills are very important because they keep everything civil and friendly and remind us that we're all working on the same team towards the common goal. A really good idea is to use an icebreaker at the starting of the meeting. This sort of brings everyone together, reminds them about what they have in common, and lets people have the opportunity to kind of check in with one another. I tend to like fun icebreakers, doing things like asking everyone to say, if you were a flavor of ice cream today, what flavor are you? So here are some tips on how to maintain some good interpersonal skills. Smile. We really do hear it in your voice. Few people want to be around someone who is always down in the dumps. Do your best to be friendly and upbeat with your coworkers. Smile often. The positive energy you radiate will draw others to you, especially when you're on a telephone or webinar meetings. We actually really do hear the difference in your voice. You want to lay the foundation for having a productive meeting. And we're going to talk about 4 points and 4 things that you can use, soft skills that you can use to really lay that foundation. The first one is to be appreciative. Appreciate others. Find one positive thing about everyone you work with and let them hear it. Make colleagues feel welcome when they call or stop by your office. If you let others know that they are appreciated, then they'll want to give you their best. Recognize others. Pay attention to others. Acknowledge their happy milestones and express concern and sympathy for difficult situations such as an illness. Make eye contact with folk and address people by their first names. One of the things that you can give to recognize recognize people is to give them awards for successes within your group. And you want to listen actively. To actively listen is to demonstrate that you intend to hear and understand another person's point of view. Restating in your own words what the other person has said is important as well. In that way, they know that you understand their meaning, and they know that your responses are more than just lip service. And you also want to operate with transparency, making sure that everyone is involved in the conversation, that everyone is copied on the email. This brings people together. Treat everyone equally and don't play favorites. This really fosters inclusion within your group. When you make a statement or announcement, check to see that you've been understood. If folks see you as someone solid and fair, they'll grow to trust you. So now we're going to talk about some other functions that you can do now that you've laid the groundwork to further and maintain your interpersonal or soft skills and good relationships within your working group. One is to resolve conflict. Learn how to be an effective mediator. If co-workers disagree over different professional disagreements, arrange a sit-down with both parties and help sort out their differences. By taking on such a leadership role, you will garner the respect and admiration from those around you. Communicate clearly. Pay close attention to both what you say and how you say it. Rehearse before a meeting and things that you're going to say. Verbal eloquence projects an image of intelligence and maturity, no matter what your age. If you tend to blurt out anything that comes to mind, people won't put much weight on your words or opinions. And use humor. That's very, very important. Don't be afraid to be funny or clever. Most people are drawn to a person that can make them laugh. Employ empathy. See it from the other person's side. Empathy means being able to put yourself in someone else's shoes and understand how they feel. Try to view situations and responses from another person's perspective. And manage your emotions. Don't complain. There's nothing worse than a chronic complainer or whiner. If you simply have to vent about something, save it for your diary. Remember, your emotions and words inform what other people think about you and inform your reputation. And now we're going to move to talk about Robert's Rules of Order. Many of you may have heard of Robert's Rules of Order before. It's sort of a guideline, been around for a while, about how different bodies come together and their rules that they use to meet. A little bit of history about Robert's Rules of Order is really to talk about parliamentary procedure. Parliamentary procedure, or law, originally referred to the customs and rules for conducting business in the British Parliament, and later referred to deliberative assemblies in general. Henry Martin Robert was an engineer officer in the regular U.S. Army in the late 1800s. Without warning, he was asked to preside over a church meeting, and to his embarrassment, he realized he didn't know how to do it. In 1876, General Robert set out to bring the rules of parliamentary law, by that time adopted by the U.S. Congress, to members of ordinary societies and organizations with the publication of the Pocket Manual of Rules of Order. The rules of parliamentary law are constructed upon a careful balance of the rights of the majority and of the minority, of individual members and of absentees. So now we're going to look at some basics on how to run a meeting using Robert's Rules of Order. The purpose of parliamentary procedure is to make it easy for people to work together effectively and to help groups accomplish their purposes. Rules of procedure should assist a meeting, not inhibit it. A meeting should deal with one matter at a time. The various kinds of motions have therefore been assigned in order or precedence. All members have equal rights, privileges, and obligations. The chairperson's main responsibility is to ensure that all people attending a meeting are treated equally. A major vote decides an issue. Parliamentary rules enable a meeting to determine the will of the majority of those attending a meeting. The rights of the minority must be protected at all times. All members have such basic rights as to the right to be heard and the right to oppose. The rights of all members should be the concern of every member, for a person may be in a majority on one question, but in a minority on the other. Every matter presented for decision should be discussed fully. The right of every member to speak on an issue is as important as each member's right to vote. Every member has the right to understand the meaning of any question presented to a meeting and to know what effect a decision will have. There is a Robert's Rules of Order handout for you to get yourself started if you'd like to use these in facilitating meetings. There's also free copies available on the web if you just do a Google search for Robert's Rules of Orders, and then you'll also find some free video training on the website or on the web as well. And we do have a image here of an old book, and it says Robert's Rules of Order Revised. And so now I'm going to bring us to our first question period. So before we move on to the next part of the webinar, do you have any questions on anything that's been covered by Denika or myself so far? You can raise your hand, or you can type them into the box. All right, so I think that Denika, I think we must have done a pretty good job because we're not getting any questions right now. So I'm going to go ahead and move us forward to our next part, step-by-step planning a meeting. And now we're going to step into larger meetings and the planning that goes into them. We're going to hand it off to Dolores Tejada, but first I am going to go ahead and send you all some documents to download. These are your handouts for this section. The first one is a sample flyer, which you will see later. It is a slide in Dolores' presentation. Then there's also two checklists, event checklists. One is for, if your group is a volunteer-driven group, and then the other one is a checklist for organizations that have paid staff and have a budget. And there we are, and I'm sending them right now. And Denika, can you tell us if they went?
Yes.
You did get them? Great. Now
yes,
I'm going to hand it off to Dolores.
Thank you, everybody, for having me. First, really quickly, just this first slide is, again, what Ted is talking about. There's the personal versus volunteer checklist that you both have received, and you'll note that at the top, the volunteer one says volunteer.
Dolores, you're going to need to speak up.
A bit. How does this sound? Is this better?
Much better, thank you.
Yes. Okay, yeah, I was on my headset. Okay, so, excuse me. The personal versus volunteer checklist, I use both of them at the same time, and the volunteer one, you'll note that it says volunteer in the title, and the other one can be used for more paid staff or someone else, or for yourself if you're doing it as an individual. and we'll get into more how to use that in the group setting in a little bit. The next thing is something that's not on the checklist is accommodation requests, and that's just because depending on the accommodation, it could get it's more specific, and keep that in mind that accommodation requests are not on there, although that is something that is always noted on the flyer. But your process to request accommodations or to make sure you have interpreters, for example, present is individual and by center. So the last thing is the flyer, which again we're going to go to in a little bit and talk about a little bit more. Can we go to the next slide, please?
Sure. And before we move, I'm just going to describe the image that's on the slide here. It's a cartoon image of a checklist, and there's a hand holding a pen that's checking off things on the checklist.
Thank you. So the next slide is an image of what the flyer looks like. At the top, it has the co-sponsoring main organization, so that would be our center, Community Resources for Independent Living, and the South Hayward Neighborhood Collaborative, which is a huge collaborative organization based in Hayward. There's a lot of print on it that includes the date, a graphic with a person standing at a podium wearing a suit and tie, the text that says "Save the Date" in bold, and then there's there's the date of the forum, and then also the location, and as well as a little bit of a in-depth about what the agenda is going to look like, what other types of things are available at the event, and then who's sponsoring the event. That verbiage is always important if you're using money from this event from a particular grant, to make sure you include that verbiage on the flyer. And then at the bottom is multiple logos of the different organizations that are sponsoring the event. So kind of this flyer really talks about, if you look at it as a whole, it covers everything that you're going to want to make sure you have solid for the event. Next slide, please. And you also have the Word document of that if you ever want to use it in the future as a template.
Great. And on this
next slide, Ted.
On this particular slide, there is an image of someone speaking in a poem, and it's in black and white, and it's a cartoon figure.
Thank you. So the next thing to think about is really the first step is using an event as a coalition builder, a big event. So the first thing is really to consider the different types of locations you want to have it, what each coalition builder can bring to the table, or each coalition sponsor could bring to the table. So the first thing you want to do is really send out a letter to invite co-sponsors of any organizations in your area that you want to work with or that you've worked with in the past. This can be a formal letter, but if you have an established relationship with any organization, I've sent a quick email, and that definitely works too. And the other thing to incentivize people to co-sponsor the event is to offer different things. So one of the really cool incentives that I have seen is offering people the option to have a question asked at a candidates forum, or a candidates panel, I should say. And that incentive worked really well because organizations wanted to see a candidate or the panel of candidates address their issue, and they knew that if they co-sponsored, they would have that opportunity to make sure that at least one question got asked. So the other thing is alternate the planning meeting and or location or facilitation, and that's just really to have equal responsibility and really have buy-in from everybody. So if you are holding planning meetings prior to the event, holding it at different locations, at different centers, allows for the organizations to get to know each other, allows for shared responsibility, but also not having it at a different location and having it at one set place also works too, especially if that place is the location where the event is going to be held. Okay, next slide. So setting the agenda. So the first thing is really branding the event that you're hosting. Do you want it to be called a forum, a meeting, just a standard event, or even a panel? And I do feel that the wording that you use to brand the event makes a difference because it really establishes what the event is going to be like. If it's a forum, a lot of people interpret that as, okay, I will get to say my piece, and you want to make sure you meet those needs, and you're making whatever the event is, you're reflecting that appropriately in all the advertisement and the information that you're putting out there. If you're having it as a panel, people know that it'll be a panel of people up there, and it'll be something where they may get a chance to ask a question. But you really want people to walk in knowing that, so that they know what they're going to expect, and not walk in thinking that they're going to get every single one of their questions answered. And that's really, really important as well. So the next thing is meeting the needs of the attendees, and that is really important because, again, you want to make sure that if you're hosting an event and you're having a forum, for example, maybe you also want to have something that talks about a specific ballot initiative, education, or you want to, whatever the demographic that you're reaching needs, maybe you want to have the registrar of voters come out and talk about absentee ballot voting. Think of it as a multi-educational event where you're not just teaching them on a specific issue, but you can use the time and the space to do multi-issues to have people table at the event. The next thing is the delayed start and breaks. You always want to advertise a little bit earlier than what your intended start time is, and make sure to take a break just for people to have a breather. And the last thing is staying on topic and establishing the rules. This is something if you're hosting a panel discussion or a candidates panel, you want to have the established rules sent to the candidates in advance so they know the format. And you also want to reiterate that format to those attending just so that people know what the boundaries are and follow the rules in terms of not speaking out of turn, staying within their time limit, and having the audience submit any, submit a request to ask a question or whatever your format is going to be. And then you want to use the establishing the rules to just really use it as a timekeeping tool as well to make sure you're on task. So that the candidates stay on topic. Next slide, please. So this is a really easy timeline that I use when I'm planning a candidates forum or a forum where I'm inviting other guest speakers that are outside of my organization. Sending out a save the date at least 2 months in advance works really well. Of course, you can do it in less time than that, but really a save the date is something really easy because you can just put the date and the time frame and put more info to be announced, and people know that there's something and more information is forthcoming, and that's totally okay too. The speaker invite 6 weeks in advance at a minimum. You could do it earlier than that, but sometimes with any speakers, they may not, some speakers, if they're candidates, may not know or want to commit so much in advance, so you really want to pick a time frame, and I think six weeks is a good time frame for that to get them to commit. Around that same time, and something that I did for the last forum I planned was I had the flyer ready to go, and on the flyer you see that we had the multiple organizations that were involved and a rough agenda, which we'll get to in a second, already planned. So you can have the flyer at the same time that you're inviting the candidates, and you can attach the flyer to the invitations to the candidates if you're sending it via email, or you can print it out and send a copy with the invite if you're mailing an invitation in. That way they have a rough idea of what the event is going to be like, and also they can distribute that to anyone else and further advertise your event. Confirmation you want to get 1 month in advance. Easily when you send out the invitation, most people will send out a reply saying whether they're confirming or not. Sometimes that's not the case, but you want to get a solid confirmation at least 1 month in advance. And then you want to do final check-ins. I do final check-ins at 2 weeks. And just saying, hey, just wanted to let you know we still have you here. We're really excited for this event. let me know if you need anything. At the 1 week mark, you can send them another short email or give them a call, and at the 1 week mark you can let them know the format of the event, and then let them know the rules. Oh, you'll have 2 minutes to speak on each topic, there'll be 5 questions, etc. And then 1 day before, you want to give them another brief call and say, we're really looking forward to the event. Do you need directions? Is there any specific requests that you need? And get that for them, just so they know, oh yes, that's tomorrow. Next slide, please. Okay, so this next slide has 2 images on it. One is of an assembly hall with multiple people sitting in chairs, wearing hats, and at the forefront are 2 men clapping. And then the picture below that is a lot of what looks like delicious food sitting on multiple tables, and there's people serving themselves food. So the next part that we're going to cover in planning a meeting is really the attendance. And this is, again, what we're discussing here is large-scale events. So what is really, really important and what the huge chunk of your time should be spent on is on outreach and making sure you have all platforms covered. You want to make sure if your center or your organization has a website, put it up on the website, get it out, get a press release out at least 1 week in advance, and then the night before. Having newspaper or any other press present is also really cool, but having them announce it sometime in advance also works. Any social media platforms that you use. And then also traditional flyers and hard print, advertising it in your center, advertising it at any meetings in advance that you have, and saying, look, this is happening, here's the flyer, take it with you, pass it along, sending it out to email lists, just really any and every outreach tool that you have, utilizing it. And also utilizing your colleagues, staff, or any volunteers that you have to do outreach for you is also really great. And that's an easy volunteer task to assign, is to have them drop off flyers at the library or drop off flyers at a senior center that they go to, or whatever location is appropriate for that event. And the other thing is, for attendance, is to provide incentives. Providing incentives and listing them on the flyer or listing them when you're announcing it or in emails is really good. One of the more than likely you will get 2 or 3 times as much attendance if you advertise that you're having food there. At the last forum that we hosted, we had a spaghetti dinner, and it was really, really popular because a lot of the population that we wanted to attract were people that may appreciate a free meal. So we made sure to have lots of goodies and a spaghetti dinner so that we could get people in the door. And we definitely had a lot of thank yous for that afterwards. And then it doesn't necessarily have to, what we did for the forum, we had each organization commit to bringing something. So for example, we brought a lot of the entrees and smaller items, snacks. And then another organization committed to making a huge pot of spaghetti. Another organization brought water, and someone else brought utensils. So if you break it up by organization and have each organization bring something small or with a $20 budget, it's very, very feasible to have a huge spread of food to incentivize people to attend. Can the next slide, please? So on this slide, there are 2 images. The first one is of a table with multiple people on the phone. It looks like they're phone banking. And then the second image is a clip art image of 4 hands joined together. So one of the other huge things to planning a huge event is that we are just one single person, and we definitely cannot do everything ourselves. So having volunteers or other staff people that are willing to help you is really, really great. And the way to organize that is just to start thinking, what do you need? What do you need done? And the checklist, the volunteer checklist, is a good starting point for some of you to look at that and say, these are just some of the things that need to be covered. So one of the first things that you need done, again, is outreach, and flyer distribution is an easy task for volunteers to do. But also, since outreach is the major thing, and getting the word out as much as possible is really important, phone calls and emails and other outreach is an easy volunteer task to do. So phone banking to consumers that you have, or phone banking to any listserv that you have, information that you have, is really, really good. And just writing a script and having a 5-minute rundown of how to do a phone banking or how to do a scripted call with your volunteers, and then letting them make the calls, is a really great training exercise for them as well. And there's a lot of people who love talking on the phone, so if you have a volunteer who wants to help out and they say they're really great on the phone, then let them utilize that skill and have them call consumers to attend the event. Another thing with volunteers, or just with any tasks with planning a meeting, is to have the organizations share the responsibilities. Since there are multiple aspects to planning the event, such as booking the space and booking the speakers and all the other logistics that go along with that, have each organization commit to doing one thing. At the last forum, we volunteered to invite all the candidates and all the guest speakers, and that really helped us because a lot of the candidates didn't know or weren't as familiar with our organization as maybe some of the other organizations that were listed on the flyer. And it got our name out to those candidates. So we even had one candidate kind of brush up on what disability issues are important and speak to those issues in their answers, because they felt that it was a disability-related event. And so that's always a good thing. And the last thing is incentives for volunteers. Offer them a free shirt, or offer them a dinner if you're doing a huge phone banking where you're going to have 6 volunteers come in at 5 o'clock to your center. Offer them some easy pizza dinner or something like that, so that you can get them in the door. Incentives always work. The next slide, please.
All right, so we're now at question time, and thank you so much, Dolores, for sharing all of those tactics that have been successful for you to pulling off large events. Does anyone have any questions for Dolores? If you're on the teleconference line, you can press *6 and unmute your phone and ask questions, or you can raise your hand if you're on the Illuminate system, or put your question into the chat box.
Ted, there was one slide that wasn't in there on location.
Do you want to talk to us about location?
Yeah, let me just do that really quickly. So the location is also really, really vital to planning a large meeting, and this is the location for the final event. So you really want to think about space that is multi-use, that you can use it to host a panel, but maybe there's a separate area or enough space to host a table for your organization to set up, or for other organizations to have information there as well. You also want to think about the location in terms of travel, especially for the community that we work with, which is people with disabilities. You want to think about how easy it is to get to the location through public transportation. And the last part of it is accessibility, which will be discussed later. So that's it in a nutshell, just those 2 things. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much, Dolores. And it seems like we are kind of a quiet crowd, so I'm going to go ahead and move us along. But if you have any questions, please put them in the chat box, and we'll make sure that they get to Dolores. So with that, I'm going to move us along here and introduce George Sharp. George is going to talk to us about accessibility and what to look for. And I'm going to release right now the document that goes with his presentation. It's your handout. It's called Accessibility Meetings and Events. And George, can you tell us if folks have if you've received that already?
Yes, I have.
Okay, great. So it went out to everyone. So remember, just click on it to accept it and save it. And take it away, George.
Okay, I do want to thank everyone. And this is for site selection, and these are some of the tricks that I have used. And
George, can you pick up the handset? It's kind of hard to hear you on the speakerphone.
I don't have a headset. And so I have to use speakerphone now.
Okay, just a little bit louder.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Is this better?
A little bit.
Okay. Okay. For site selection, it's a good idea to visit each site that you're contemplating looking for, whether it's a hotel, conference center, or any community building that you're looking at holding your event or meeting, especially to determine what barriers for accessibility exist. I know that's what I try to do, especially when there's a wide range of disabilities out there, especially when there's visual, hearing, mobility. And it's a good idea to look for those things that are most important, like public transportation. So some of the things that we want to look for are accessible parking. If it's a hotel, is there hotel shuttle available? Public transportation stops. One of the things that I try to look for is the path of travel stable, firm, and slip resistant. And especially for the path of travel and from the public transportation stop, because we all know that sometimes that sidewalks are not always maintained. So we want to make sure that it's free of any tree trunks or breaks in the sidewalk. And the picture that we have here is a good example of some of those things. We have accessible parking in the lower left-hand corner, which is a van that's backed into the van accessible spot and a ramp let down. And in the lower right-hand corner, we have a public transportation stop. And in the upper right-hand corner, we have a drop-off point. And in the upper left-hand corner looks like a school. And it has 3 locations where people can get dropped off, and it has a path of travel, and there's trees all around. And in this slide, the picture shows path of travel with a ramp leading up to an entrance that has automatic doors. And there are people that are going up to the door. One has looks like a cane. There's a light post, a sign, and a tree next to the sidewalk, and that has a low-hanging branch. And this is something that we want to look for, is their automatic doors. Again, is it free of a low-hanging tree, any obstructions, maybe a fire hydrant? I know I've been to other places that when we're looking at places to hold meetings, and the path of travel to the entrance is not accessible, so we have to look for an alternative route to that entrance, or we look for a different place. And in this slide, there's 2 pictures. One is the International Symbol of Accessibility, and the other picture is a visually impaired person with his cane. He's dressed in a suit, and he's walking in a hall corridor that has a fire extinguisher on the wall and a water fountain. And we want to make sure that the international symbol is hanging on all accessible parking and that it's labeled on all the restrooms. And if your meeting event is located down a hall corridor, we want to make sure that those corridors are free of any obstructions or protruding objects like fire extinguishers and stuff like that, because someone with a visual impairment could injure themselves. Now, this is a good example of a large meeting space. Yes, it looks like a voting booth, but it's a large enough room that has 2 entrances that are accessible, and it does have ample room to accommodate wheelchairs and assistance with animals. It can include a banquet, reception, meal areas, and there's also room for clear line of sight for an interpreter or captioner, and it can include an appropriate number of seats. And in this slide, we have a gentleman that's got his hand on his head, and you know he's just forgotten something. And so some things that we tend to overlook, and we know that the room that we're in, the building that we're in, does have restrooms, but do we go into the restrooms to see if they're accessible? We tend to not. Are we going to look for an accessible stage if we need one? Probably not. But it's a good idea to ask the place, do they have a room? One thing that I always ask is there an on-site PA system with a portable microphone? Because some people with disabilities can't hold a microphone themselves. Another key thing that we tend to overlook is toileting space for assisted animals. And one last thing is accessible elevators. Sometimes we hold meetings in historic buildings, and the elevators are small, so we tend to overlook those things. So those are one things that I always want to look for before I rent that room and schedule a meeting in it. And questions?
All right. Thank you very much, George. So does anyone have any questions for George about accessibility and what to look for in seeking a meeting place for large meetings?
Mark, you have a check next to your name. Did you want to ask a question? Mark is typing in the chat box.
Great, thank you. Mark was just saying, yes, he got the file, meaning the handout. Thank you very much, Mark, for letting us know that you got it. Does anyone else have any questions they want to put into the chat box, or you can raise your hand and we can call on you? It must be that 100-degree weather and all that heat. It's a quiet group today, huh? Well, George, thank you very much for all of your help. And that was a wonderful presentation on accessibility. And, of course, there is a handout. The handout for this section does have a lot of links to it and resources that you can go to and research in your own community. This is, of course, what George does in his community when he looks for accessible meeting spaces. So next we're going to move to an inside perspective, candidate forums, and we're going to talk about candidate forums from the perspective of a candidate. With us today again is Laura Mancha, who is not only a systems change organizer and an advocate for people with disabilities, part of the Systems Change Network, but she's spent over 2 decades in elected office, mostly on school board. Now before I hand things off to Laura here, I am going to send you 2 handouts, and these are going to be our final handouts. The first one is they're just some tip sheets and everything. The first one is the Iowa Association of School Boards Candidate Night checklist. It's a really good checklist about what to look for when and what to do. and when planning a candidates night, and I think that it touches on a lot of the same things that Laura's going to be talking about. And then there's also a candidate forums tip sheet that includes a letter to candidates, a sample letter to candidates inviting them to appear at your candidates forum. And so now I'm going to send those. There we go. And we just sent them. Remember to click on Save on the dialog box. And Laura, are you there?
Yes, I am.
Great, great.
Can you hear me?
We can hear you great. You might want to just make sure that you speak loud enough since you are coming in by phone today, and thank you so much for joining us today. And so Laura's going to talk to us about an inside perspective on candidate forums, and she's going to start off with the choose the races to include. Go ahead, Laura.
Hi, everybody. Speaking low has never been a problem with me. I'm smiling. I'm taking Ted's advice. I'm happy to be here. And we'll begin with our, like Ted mentioned, choosing the races that you would like to include. Where I come from, that was determined by the number of candidates. And if you had a large number of candidates running for one race, then you would permit only one race per forum. For me, there were 11 people running and several people running for city council, so they split it, and they did it school board was one Tuesday, and then the next Tuesday was a city council forum. All of these forums were on local government television, and sometimes, unfortunately, they were rerun several times. So if you made any blunders, you could see yourself make them over and over again on the community channel. That's an inside perspective. And on to the next slide, please. And this slide would be on inviting the candidates. And up in the corner, there's a stack of envelopes that looks like invitations to something important. And it's important when you invite candidates that you make sure you invite all the candidates that are running for the office. And the way you can get the information for the candidates is through your local county registrar of voters. When you pull papers and file papers, you really have to put it all out there on the line, so you should be able to get their information from your registrar. When I've done it, and I've done it 4 times now on television, I was invited by mail, and I was required to RSVP. And it's important that your candidates let you know that they're going to be there so that you can have a place set up for them, and I recommend a pad and pencil and maybe a bottle of water. And I've noted that you might want to seat them in alphabetical order so you're not looking like you're trying to give an advantage to one over another. And on to the next slide. And this would be what to include in the invite. And the icon in the corner is a gal sitting at a table writing out an invitation probably. And on this invitation, you would want to obviously include the date, time, and location, and possibly some of the topics, depending on if you know them or not. You would definitely want to include the rules and structure. The way I've done it, there was a 3-minute opening and then a 3-minute closing for each candidate. And a lot of times during that time, the candidate would thank the people who would endorse them or that had helped them, and take a minute to tout themselves in those 2 openings and closings. The last forum I participated in, there were 11 people who were running, and the night of the forum, we were all given a list of the questions that we were going to answer, and they asked us to be there an hour ahead, and we got a chance to study those questions for the hour. They gave us pen and paper, and people who were really worried about it sat down and wrote notes as fast as they could to try to answer all the questions in order to be prepared for what was coming. And then on the next slide, next slide please. It's along the same lines of what to include in the invite. In the invitation you explain all the rules, and like I said, when we did the questions, when the forum began, all those questions were drawn out of a hat. And the icon on this slide is a big hat and a man's hand dipping into it, pulling out a ticket. So the questions were drawn out of a hat, and then each candidate in order had to answer a question for the first time, and then each successional candidate could answer the question, but obviously it would be redundant, or they could expand on that question. So if you got the question the first time, in a way it's an advantage, but it's also very stressful to be the first one to answer a question. And if you hadn't done your preparation, you you look a little idiotic. So if they're smart, they'll be prepared. And then we'll move on to the next slide. And this was on developing the questions for your forum. And the icon on the slide is a picture of a newspaper, and that's because the questions were, the forum was advertised in the local newspaper, and citizens were invited to contribute questions to the Chamber of Commerce. And the Chamber of Commerce had a political action committee that went through all the questions, made sure that they were fair and on the issues, and they decided on the questions that would be used in the forum. It was really important that no questions during my forums anyway were from the audience. They were all questions that everybody knew were going to be, well, the candidates didn't know until 1 hour before the forum. They were secret until 1 hour. But the moderator knew, and the moderator wouldn't allow anyone from the audience just to come up. And obviously no personal questions from the audience would be allowed, and the moderator would make sure that that didn't happen. And on to the next slide, please. I'm still smiling. This slide is on fairness, and this is really important, especially from the candidate's perspective, because I wouldn't want to go into a forum thinking that everybody's minds were made up against me, and you just want to make sure that you run your forum very fair, and the facilitators must and always remain impartial and nonpartisan. The icon on this one is the donkey and the elephant, obviously representing the Democrats and the Republicans. But it's important that forums remain impartial and nonpartisan. I advise that you adhere strictly to defined and equal time. No more than 2 minutes to answer. Each question was given 2 answers. Some candidates would use up the whole 2 minutes, and others who were unprepared would use very little. The proctor, parliamentarian, or facilitator would keep the meetings and the candidates on task. The 2-minute answering period should address the issues only and never used to attack others. On to the next slide. And this is still on fairness. And there's a picture of a guy that looks like MC Hammer with a big clock on it, and he's pointing at the time, because this is about keeping the time and making it fair. A timekeeper should give a 30-second warning with a green flashcard, and that the answering period is almost over in 30 seconds. And then when the time is up, the 2 minutes is done, either a red flashcard or mine, they used a flashlight, and that would signal the candidate that the time was up. And all of these rules about timing and cards and minutes were explained clearly to not just the candidates, but to everyone in the listening audience, and that would include, obviously, the people at home. And, and like I said, under fairness, it's really important that there would be no exceptions to that and no debate on it. And that's my personal experiences with forums. I hope that I've been helpful, and I'd be happy to answer any questions, or you can email me. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much, Laura. Does anyone have any questions from Laura? Because I know that just with us working in the network, we've had some great conversations with her about things that have come up at candidate forums, and she's been really helpful to us in the other advocates and organizers in helping to guide them in planning their candidate forums. She has a great, interesting perspective. So Sandra from Drill has a question. Sandra, can you type it into the chat box, and we'll go ahead. I'll go ahead and ask it for you. All right. So Sandra's question, Laura, is dealing with security with people so divisive on issues. How would that be handled? Precautionary, of course.
Well, when I did our forums, they were at the city council chambers. I mean, yeah, right where the city council meetings were held. So I don't know. I don't remember the police ever being like a presence there or anything. But the police station's around the corner from the council chambers. So
yeah, I think that.
I don't know.
Go ahead, Laura.
So that's it. I can't really answer that.
Yeah, I think that for the most part, we're talking about local races here in California that folks might be doing candidate forums for that might not get as heated as like a gubernatorial debate or a presidential debate or something like that. But I think you do bring up a good point, is that if you do have any concerns about safety or security, especially when there are some people that, sometimes a local group will turn out people. Having a civic building as a location is a really good idea, because the city or the county is obviously going to have their own security force. They call them police, and they're going to protect their own building. And most likely, that's going to be an accessible building. So I see that we have a question from Francis Smith. And Fran, are you there?
This is Fran. I don't know how to type
Oh,
in the
that's
box.
fine, Fran. We can hear you. Do you want to ask Laura a question?
It could be that somebody in the audience would get sort of out of control. It's a good idea to have like a volunteer sergeant at arms or something like that. And the moderator could call on him and say, could you please ask this person to sit down or leave the room? Or
Yeah, that's a good idea. One of the issues under fairness that I always thought, I don't know, and remember we're local here, but whenever you go to as a candidate, when I would go to the forum, I would try to bring my own little cheering crowd, so that when I answered questions, I got clapping, But not everybody else did that, but the ones who were savvy did, So if you're sitting at home and you're watching a rerun and you hear me answer a question, you're going to hear a bunch of people clapping in the background, right? But then it's not really fair, because someone else might be there who doesn't have a cheering squad, And I don't know, I always thought that, but if you want to win, you have to do stuff like that. And I don't think you could limit your audience to not clapping. But a sergeant of arms is a great idea. I mean, someone who, and like I said at the beginning, if everybody understands what the rules are, then they won't try to do anything.
And I think that's I think those are some good points, Laura. We, of course, the folks on here on the training today are really interested in being fair and impartial and throwing a candidate's forum. So it's really good that you shared the insight from a candidate's perspective, that you bring your own cheering section and you do what you have to do to get elected, so that we can anticipate those types of things. So we are about to move on a little bit, but are there any other questions before we move on? Okay, great. Well, thank you very much for joining us today on our training organizing meetings.